You're standing on the ground beside your ship, looking up to a sky tinged with darkness. A high-profile passenger fidgets in your back seat. Maybe it's a CEO, a celebrity, a president, someone who needs to get where they're going on time. You know the weather could prove dangerous, but you feel pressured to push on. A battle rages in your gut between the darkness that waits above and the ridicule you may suffer speaking up about it. Our guest today understands the conflict that lives in all of us, in flight operations and far, far beyond. Gary Maddux served 20 years flying helicopters for the U.S. Marine Corps, including a 4-year stint in Presidential Squadron HMX-1. He retired from the military with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel in 2010 and spent the next 7 years flying for Airbus. In 2019, Gary lost his daughter Kaylee to suicide. Since then, he's dedicated his life to mental health outreach and awareness. Now a licensed counselor, Gary hopes to provide others with the insight he's wrestled from tragedy. We'll learn how Gary came to helicopters from an early interest in fixed-wing flight. He'll reflect on his time in the Marines and break down a mission that opened his eyes to the importance of speaking up during unsafe flight conditions. And finally, Gary will give us a look into the past few years of his life, what he's learned in his work in mental health, and what we can do for those around us who are struggling just beneath the surface. This is Push to Talk with Bruce Webb, Episode 5, Be the Light.
I'd like to welcome Gary Maddux to the show. Gary and I have known one another for 12 years, maybe a little longer. We worked together here at Airbus Helicopters as pilots. Gary came to us from the United States Marine Corps, and we're very lucky he chose to begin his civil career with Airbus. Gary was super proactive in his search for a post-military position. In fact, I believe we hired him and waited 4 or 5 months for him to actually begin.
Yeah, it was about six months prior. You guys gave me the go-ahead.
I think that may be a record. It's certainly a long time to hire someone until they began, but Gary was well worth the wait. When I think of Gary, I think of running. One of our traditions here at Airbus Helicopters was that we ran 5K most every day at lunchtime. And depending upon who was in town and available to run on that particular day, there may be as few as 2 or as many as 8, maybe 9, 10 pilots running. It was beneficial on many levels. Of course, there were the physical benefits of a great cardio workout, but also the psychological benefits, stress relief, and it built camaraderie. We loved it. Gary was certainly a leader in our running group, as well as a leader within our flight operations department. So again, I'd like to welcome Gary to the show. Let's begin on how you became a Marine aviator. 18-year-old Gary Maddux.
Sure. The first thing I wanted to say was it's funny that you mentioned the running thing, because as I drove in this morning, I haven't driven to Airbus for probably, 5 years. I've flown in here a couple of times, but I haven't driven. And as I drove in this morning, I drove by some of our old running routes, and that's what was going through my head. It's just interesting that you brought up the running thing, because I was like, wow, I remember this trail. I remember doing this trail. I remember running with this person, so like you said, the camaraderie. And I just remember, too, that on the day when you didn't want to run, for whatever reason, somebody would come by and say, are we going? And you would go run. So it really, I think that particular time in my life, the 7 years here, I probably ran more and was more dedicated to it than I've ever been in my life because of that. So anyway, that's an aside. Yeah, 18-year-old Gary Maddux. I think actually it started when I was 6 years old. At least that's what my dad tells me, that when I was 6, I would talk about just aviation. I was fascinated with airplanes, and I was the kid in the outfield looking up at the helicopter flying over when I should have been paying attention, and a ball's getting hit my way, right? In Little League, I was just always fascinated with airplanes. I always wanted to go to the airport. I can even remember in high school, me and my best friend, we lived in Houston, and we would drive to Intercontinental Airport, and we'd find that road that not many people knew about. You could drive down the road, and you end up by the fence of the airport, and the 747s would come right over the top. You almost felt like you could reach up and touch them. And so I've always loved aviation. And so at 18 years old, deciding that really the military was probably the way to go. My father and his 3 brothers all served. My grandfather served, was a World War II bombardier. And so history of military service in our family. And it just felt like that was the path. I wanted to fly. I thought, I don't really have the money to do it on my own. So why not, go to school and get a scholarship and try to do it in the military.
Were helicopters part of that thought process at that time, or was it more fixed wing?
It was more fixed wing at the time. Also, so now we're all watching the Top Gun Maverick. Well, that was when Top Gun was out.
I remember well, sure.
And I wanted to fly F-14s for the Navy. I mean, that's what was in my head. Helicopters were not necessarily the main thing, but also, after going to school and then shifting my scholarship to Marine Corps based on some of the Marine officers that I saw and some of the influence they had on me. And also, I will tell you, the Marine Corps had the benefit of a guaranteed flight slot, is what they called it back then. So the Navy did not. And so I could sign up my sophomore year, take the AQT FAR, which is called something different now, but take the test, pass the test, sign on the dotted line, and they would guarantee me a flight slot, a position at flight school. Mm-hmm. And so I did all that, again, because that's what I wanted. And then the only obstacle was just to get that degree from Texas A&M. So, got the degree.
What was the school again?
Texas A&M.
Kind of a running joke.
That's
so
right.
Gary's an Aggie through and through.
Yes.
And I believe all of his children graduated from A&M.
Yes. Yeah. And my wife? And multiple members of the family. So it runs Aggie Maroon runs deep in our family. So, getting to that point, getting into flight school, I'll be honest with you, my attitude from the very beginning when I started flight school was just the gold wings. That was the prize that we were all running for. And so at that point, I did realize I might end up being a helicopter pilot. I still thought, I'm going to fly Harriers or F-18s. I knew that helicopters was a choice and was an option and a possibility. And flight school is really very much like we called it a crapshoot because you're competing against yourself. You really don't know what your peers are doing. And honestly, you don't even know who you're going to graduate with. So you can't really put your eyes on anything and say, I'm running the race against those 10 people. Mm-hmm. And so you just did the best that you could. And then at the end of the day, I feel like God knew that I needed to be a helicopter pilot. And I really do believe that. The community is so important in the military as well. And a lot of young military men and women that are going in to fly or to do anything in the military, my advice to them would be find the community that you gel with the most and then strive to be part of that community. And don't get so wrapped around like I have to be an F-18 pilot or I have to fly Cobras or, I have to fly the V-22. I mean, that's great if that's what you want to do, but understand that each one of those communities has their own type of people.
Feel. Absolutely.
And I meshed just so well with the helicopter community in general. And I really do believe that I needed to fly slower and have time to think. And so and then the community itself, especially the 53 Echo Super Stallion community, which is what I ended up flying, I just really fit in well. Yeah. And it ended up being a good fit. And I really do believe that God knew what he was doing. And so there I was. I got helicopters, selected helicopters, thought I wanted to be on the East Coast and fly 53s. And we ended up on the West Coast flying 53s.
That sounds like the Marines.
Exactly. And so again, it was one of those, I got the wings. The prize is mine. Now just go have fun and enjoy flying an amazing aircraft. Because no matter what you flew, whether it was Frogs, 53s, Cobras, Hueys, Harriers, F-18s, C-130s, it was going to be amazing.
Yes. Well, you mentioned speed. I will admit, perhaps this it doesn't say a great thing about my mental acuity, but, when we go from flying aircraft that are 90, 100, maybe even 120 knots.
Right.
And then you jump into a ship that goes 150, 160. Honestly, some aircraft, you can cruise VH at 162, 163 knots. It does change how you think. 160 knots is remarkably faster than 120 knots.
Yes.
I have a helicopter speed mind as well.
Amen. So. And in a helicopter, the ability to, I'm doing 150 knots. I need to slow down and think. Or, I just think about when you get into weather, right? We slow down and we start to descend, right? That's like kind of but we have the option in a helicopter to slow down without having to worry about stalling, right?
Sure.
So I can come to a hover. I just remember talking to some of my mentors, and it actually led to a scenario where this is what I did one day. We were stuck in the mountains in California, just north of San Diego, and we literally had to come to a hover over a farmer's field because we didn't want to go and invert an IMC. But we had the option to do that. If I was in a small plane, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So the beauty of helicopters, right? I can come to a hover over a farm. I can land in that farmer's field if I want to.
Right. Right. And I think many of us have.
Right. Exactly. So the beauty of helicopters. Yeah.
Right. Right. Well, you were talking about IMC and weather, although I'm not sure this was an IMC event, but you had an event where you actually had landed the ship, or a group of you landed 53s on the beach.
So I think what we were talking about recently, it was actually it was a 4-ship mission to go out to the ship that was in North Carolina, at a New River, and we were doing a 4-ship out to an LHD, which is an aircraft carrier, helicopter aircraft carrier, and the purpose of that was to get a picture on the ship, our 4 aircraft together.
Right, you're flying out to take a photo of yourselves.
Right, and we're flying in really bad conditions. I mean, it really was an IFR day. So we had no business even going single ship, but 4-ship, pushing the weather, snooping and pooping is what we like to call it. Snooping, and we're flying along New River and along the beach, and I think a lot of times we get a little complacent. We're like, well, we're going to be over the water. There's no obstacles, so we can go low and slow, and we can still get where we're going to go. But you're in a formation. Helicopters don't do the fixed wing thing where we climb into the weather together and stay tight, sucked up on each other's wings, and we can go 2-3 ships into IFR. We don't do that in the helicopter community because we have rotors that are slowing around.
Exactly.
And we don't want to intermesh those things, right? So that was just one of those days, where we really shouldn't have been flying, but we did it. And so that led to our discussion on just decision making. And we're taught, I think in most military, I can't speak for all the organizations, but I feel like we all kind of get taught this. Like anybody at any given time, including the crew chief. So the 53 Echo was manned by a pilot, a co-pilot, and at least one crew chief. That was the mandatory crew. Had to have 3 people on board. A lot of times it would be 4 people with 2 crew chiefs in the back. But even the crew chief could speak up and say, sir, I'm not comfortable with this. I want to knock it off. And then if somebody gets on the radio and says, knock it off, then
it needs to stop.
Whoever's leading that flight has to stop.
Mm-hmm.
You're not allowed to continue. Mm-hmm. And if you try to say continue, then it can get pretty ugly, right? So, and that was just one of those days where I'm Dash 4. I'm the last, I'm ship number 4, tail end Charlie. I'm an aircraft commander, young aircraft commander. CO is leading the mission, and I spoke up. Nobody else was speaking up, but I just felt like this was very uncomfortable for me, and I spoke up and said, let's knock it off.
And it takes a lot of fortitude to make that call. I believe that, my belief is it knows other 3 aircraft, probably all 3 or 4 people, but it's certainly a couple in each ship, wanted to call it off too. They just didn't have the intestinal fortitude to say, hey, listen, this is wrong, and we're going to stop. I really do believe that. I joke that, when the one person says, yep, we're going to call it off, the next thing you're going to hear is someone else say, oh, yeah, I was just about ready to say the same thing.
Right.
Because everyone feels that pressure. And as you know, the people you're flying with, they're trained just like you. They have the same perception of reality, and they know it's not safe. But they're willing to continue. They're willing to go to push for mission's sake. And, maybe if you're going out to save, 100 lives, or that's one thing. But when you're going out to take a picture of a boat, that's foolish. And congratulations to you, for making those decisions. I know that's tough. So when you got to the beach and landed, how were you treated?
Well, so on that particular day, we actually went back to the airfield.
Okay.
But I was just thinking to myself, like, what do I remember? Because we literally were like maybe 2 or 3 miles from the beach from New River. And so, once we got into the area where I said, well, I'm not comfortable, let's knock this off. So we just kind of turned around, followed the river, and went back home. I don't remember anybody like busting my balls, for lack of a better term, about making that call. I think I could see it I just remembering back, I don't think the CO was real happy about me making that call. And I think he felt like we could have pushed it and made it to the ship and been fine. But he did. I will give him this. When I said knock it off, he did. He knocked it off, and he didn't push back. Mm-hmm. He on the radio, he wasn't like, come on, Dash 4, suck it up. This will be fine.
Right. Good.
He said, okay, let's RTB.
Right.
Let's return to base. And so, and I don't remember any of my compadres or my contemporaries, the other captains or the aircraft commanders, saying anything to me. But I really don't remember anybody in particular. It doesn't come to my mind coming up to me and going, man, I'm glad you made that call.
Right.
I do know that my crew was uncomfortable. I know my crew chief was uncomfortable as well. And that's what's kind of led me, because I think I'll be honest with you, I think I was thinking to myself, do I really want to do this? Do I really want to single myself out and be the one that says, sir, we need to go back? But with my crew, and that's the thing in each
and you're
ship, it's like,
them.
You fly to the comfort level of the least, the person that has the least amount of comfort. If they speak up, you have to honor that. So my crew chief
or I might say the best judgment.
Yeah. Well,
in
yeah,
this
it
case,
was. It was
not
the best
least
judgment.
amount of comfort, but best judgment.
Yeah.
The minimum someone can do. The minimum
Right.
someone can do in that situation is you make the call and then everyone's fine and they just land. That's kind of the minimum, I believe.
Right.
What should happen is, honestly, the commanding officer should come up to you and say, listen, Gary, I know that was a difficult thing to do. I appreciate you doing that, because that is an example to the other aviators. And in my life, I had a similar experience, actually. Dell Livingston was the vice president here for a couple of decades. I worked for Dell, and you remember Dell.
Yeah, I remember Dell well.
And we were out on a flight together, and I forget the aircraft we were flying, but we were a flight of two, just like many events, we had to be somewhere. I don't know where it was. And there are VFR helicopters. We're both IFR rated, but we're flying around in VFR helicopters. And, as fate would have it, the day worsened and we got lower and slower and lower and slower. And finally, I said, Dell, we got to stop. There's an airport, 3 o'clock, 2 miles. We're going to that airport. And I remember Dell said on the radio, well, we can go just a little bit further and see. And I said, no, we're making a right turn. We're going to this field.
Right.
And he's my boss. So we landed. Although I had a good relationship with Dell, it still doesn't change the fact that he's my boss. And now we're not going to make our destination.
Right.
And so we were shutting the aircraft down. After I finished the logbook, Dell came up to the ship and he said, I just want to tell you thank you. He said, you probably saved our lives. And that sticks in my mind to this day. He wanted to push on. He wanted to, and he might have left to his own devices. And he is an extremely competent aviator. I mean, one of my mentors for sure. I have nothing but ultimate respect for Dell. But we get trapped in that mindset of, I got to go, I got to go, I got to go. And as you know, it takes a lot of commitment to safety to say, listen, we got to stop. And you know what? I don't know what we missed by stopping. I don't know how it affected the schedule, blah, blah,
Right.
blah, blah, blah. But I do know this. It affected our lives because we're still here. And we don't know what would have happened had we continued, nor do you know. So just as God called you to be a Marine helicopter pilot, that day you may have saved a flight of 4. I don't want to be too dramatic. People say, well, maybe that's true, maybe it's not true. But I pose, when you look at our accident statistics, I don't believe that people who get themselves into that situation feel comfortable.
Right.
I think they're afraid.
Right.
Because I think we're all the same. I think we all have that same innate desire to live. And when you're flying a 30,000-pound helicopter a few hundred feet off the ground at 50 knots and you can't see forward because the nose is up and you can barely see sideways, and it's just a horrible feeling. And we've all felt it.
It is a horrible feeling.
And
your stomach is wrenching, and we used to joke and say that you're squeezing the seat cushion up into your rear end, right?
Right.
In a little bit different terminology, but the stress is there. No one likes to be there.
Mm-hmm. And we discount the fact that when you're in that situation, imagine an emergency not created by yourself. In other words, we put ourselves in those situations. So we've created that emergency.
Yes.
What if something else happens? What if while you're doing that, because from a certification standpoint, we test to 1 failure. Well, but the failure isn't the pilot placing the ship in a tenuous condition. So let's imagine you are flying along at, 60 knots at 300 feet in this 53, and the tail rotor fails or an engine fails. There's a litany of things that could go wrong that would make that situation, which was already tenuous, potentially catastrophic. I think it's easy to forget that. Or, if you're flying a single engine aircraft at 300 feet at 50 knots with a 20-knot tailwind and you lose an engine, you're in trouble.
Yes.
That's one of the reasons Gary has been so successful in his career, I'm certain, is good judgment. And it certainly didn't affect your career, not severely anyway. And
No, there was no backlash or repercussion that I know of.
Right. And you had a case, so I'm going to jump ahead and then I'll come back. So Gary flew for HMX-1 for 8 years. You were at HMX-1?
4 years. 4 years, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's a standard tour for officers to go there for 4 years. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll come back to that a little bit later in the show. But yeah, so essentially the helicopter that flies the president around, that unit's HMX-1. And Gary, you flew during whose administration?
During Bush 43s, so George W. Bush from 2004 to 2008. So that would have been his second term.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Super. So now I'm going to go back in time. So back in your career flying, I remember you were telling me a story one time about an operation where you needed to aerial refuel.
Yes.
So tell us about that. Tell us that event. I think that's very compelling as well.
Yeah. So that's maybe an example of just, you plan, right? And then especially for the military, we have a tendency to overplan, but it's necessary with the kind of flying that we're doing. But, you come up with this elaborate plan and then you brief the plan. And then now the idea is that, we have safety measures in place, right? We brief a bingo. We're on this mission. This was a 4-ship mission as well. This was right after 9/11, and we were training. We were forward deployed on an LHD again, and we were focusing on long-range raid missions. So in the 53 had about 4 hours of gas, and then we could aerial refuel and extend that to another 4 hours. So, and the whole purpose that we were training for was, to really get comfortable, because we don't do a lot of aerial refueling normally unless you're deployed. Back when you're not deployed and you're flying out of your home base, you may do it. It was normal for most of us to go out of currency and have to go do a recurrent flight to get the ability to actually go do it and train. So just didn't do it very much. So anyway, we were trying to get proficient again, and not just qualified to do it, but proficient. So this was a mission where we were practicing that long range raid capability. We needed to aerial refuel to get to a forward arming and refueling position, and then practice setting all that up for the Cobras to use us for gas and for ammo. We got to the tanker, 4 ships. We all got to take turns getting gas, and it's an orchestra.
What kind of aircraft is the tanker?
C-130.
C-130.
So a Marine C-130, and this is a nighttime mission, so it's complex. We've already done some day stuff and practiced, and so this was kind of this was an important mission for us to prove our ability to do this. I will tell you that as easy as sometimes the jet guys make it look, which I don't think it's easy for them either. For helicopters on the tanker, it's not easy. It's one of the more challenging things that we do, I would say, especially under night vision goggle conditions. So this is a night vision goggle mission. We're going to the tanker. So one of the more complex things, and the crews have to be very prepared and honed and everything. So we're there, and this is a must fuel as well if we're going to get to
right. You're not just playing.
No, yeah.
If you don't get the fuel,
right. This
you've
is a
got
must
a problem.
fuel. And so the bingo is set for us. If you don't get the gas you need and you get to your bingo, you're supposed to stop and go back to the ship, and the mission's over. And you don't get to go to your FARP, and you don't get to practice your arming and refueling procedures, and you don't get to prove that you can do this. Like, you actually, if you get to the bingo, there's a sense of failure because we need to be able to do this for real. Like, we're training to do this for real.
Sure, right. It's an operational requirement
against the enemy, right? So, and we had some future operations that we thought we were going to do where we would need this capability. So I guess I'm trying to paint a picture of the amount of stress I think that is on each one of the crew, the pilots that are in the 4 aircraft, and even the leader of the mission, to show that his squadron and his people can do the mission that we were brought to do on this deployment. Long story short, it's our turn to fuel, and we have trouble. We're not able to get the fuel that we need, and we tried multiple times. And we were getting closer and closer to bingo. I mean, we would, get the probe in the basket and take some fuel, and then it would disconnect, and then we'd have to replug again. And so just what I remember from the night is that I was really struggling. It just wasn't one of my better nights. And who knows what I'm not going to say I was the best aerial refuel guy in the world, but I normally did okay. But this night in particular, I'm not getting it. I'd let the co-pilot try as well. And we got to our bingo. And, I guess on this particular night...
So you're the last ship. You're the last one to plug?
Yeah, we're the last one to plug. Everybody else has got their gas. And we got to the bingo. And so, again, it's one of those things where am I going to be the guy that makes this mission fail? Because I'll be honest with you, that's what it felt like to me, is that the mission was a failure. But I got to my bingo and I just got on the radio and said, hey, I'm at my bingo. I need to RTB.
Right. That's the procedure.
Yeah.
I mean, right. That's what bingo means.
Right. It's time to RTB.
Right.
And then there was a hidden consequence here, so an unforeseen consequence. I did get pushback on this particular night. I'm not going to say names or who or whatever, but basically somebody got on the radio and was like, give it another shot. You can do it, type of thing.
Well, and 5 more minutes giving it another shot is 5 more minutes. What's actually a 10-minute delta. Yeah. Because you've gone away from where you need to go by 5, which means you got to go 5 back. I mean,
right. The peer pressure was there. The mission felt, the pressure to not fail was there. And this felt real world to me, even though we weren't taking, and I don't know. I don't know if my thought process maybe would have been different if this was a real mission and we needed to get things to help out people that were maybe going to die. That might have changed things. But
it also would have amped the stress.
It would have. But in this particular case, I just said, I'm at my bingo. I am going to RTB. I literally said, my intent at that point was, I will break formation and I will not do what you tell me to do. I am going. And that's the thing about the Marine Corps that I really appreciated. So we were a 4-ship. There was a division leader. There was a section leader. And I don't remember if I was the section lead or if I was, the last guy on the totem pole. I don't remember. But I do know that within my own ship, I always had the autonomy as an aircraft commander to make the decisions for my ship and my people, outside of all the rest. Right. I could disobey the orders of the division leader if I felt like I needed to. And so I was ready to do that. I was exercising my right as an aircraft commander to call RTB and go back. And that's the way we briefed the plan that way. And so now we need to fly the plan. Mm-hmm. We need to fly the brief.
Right.
And I'm glad that we RTB'd, because who knows what would have happened. I mean, we got back to the ship and the ship had turned on their lights because they were doing well deck operations. And so now we weren't able to use NVGs to land on the ship. We had to do unaided landings to the ship. We had gotten into the habit in the Marine Corps at the time of just doing all NVG stuff and not doing a lot of unaided flights anymore. I mean, why do you need to do that, right? You have NVGs. Why do unaided? Right. Well, guess what? Now I'm back at the ship and I have to go unaided. I have to pop the goggles up and I have to land unaided on the ship. And we struggled to get back to the ship unaided that night. It just one thing after the other, right? It's like, and so I needed that 10 to 15 minutes of gas because we waved off like 3 times. So we came into land and weren't successful and had to wave off and go around. I want to say about 3 times before I finally came in, and that 4th time we got it on the deck. But if I would have been there and didn't have that extra 10 to 15 minutes of gas that I would have wasted trying again, I might have put that helicopter into the water that night.
Which is why you plan, you have procedures, and then you follow the procedures. It's fascinating. Again, we're all human and it's easy to make these errors, but people will have an event, whether it's bingo fuel or maybe it's a caution light or, God forbid, a warning light. And instead of just following the procedure, it's very tempting, if you're 5 miles from your home airport, to say, well, it says land immediately, but I can make it.
Yeah, I can make it. What are the odds?
Right. And who knows what the odds are. But what I do know is a lot of very smart people wrote the procedure to save life.
Certainly.
And if the procedure is you land immediately and you're 10 miles from the airport or 5 miles from the airport, you still land. You don't continue. And in your case, when you're bingo fuel, had you gone another 3 or 4 minutes, 5 minutes, that could have ended in an absolute catastrophe. And even though you have dunker training and you're prepared for that, and, it's not like you're going to ditch the ship after a failure, you're going to get your crew off, but still you can lose your life. I know that you retired as a colonel in the Marines, and I believe the reason you were able to achieve that rank is because you made those hard decisions. I certainly look at all of that with respect and admiration. Everyone listening that's an aviator knows those pressures.
Yes.
And it can be crushing. It can be debilitating. And, as an aviator in the Marines, the Marines, rah, eat raw meat. You got to get it done.
Of course. Yeah.
And I know that's a stereotype, not the reality of all Marine aviators. But, when you reach a limit, you got to stop. I liken it to running. The first thing to give up when you run is your mind. It's not your legs. It's not your lungs. It's your mind.
Right.
We have a propensity to push through that pain, but sometimes you hurt yourself doing that. I know I've certainly done that in my time running where, I should have just heeded the warning my body was giving me, but I thought I could push through. It's the same in aviation. You got to heed those warnings. There's a lot of things in that helicopter that tell you the limits of the vehicle: torque, temp, EGT, IGT, MGT, all the stuff. What tells you you've reached your limit? Policy and procedure should help guide us, but ultimately it's how you feel. And when you have that pit in your stomach, that starts out the size of a pea,
right,
and unfortunately grows rapidly, that's your body saying limit.
Well, and I think of just in my current job, just flying a civilian ship around DFW, single engine 407, but I have a limit, and thankfully that limit is supported by my superiors. And I mean, we use 1,003, which actually in my mind it's 1,005. We say 1,003 a lot, but lately I've upgraded that myself to 1,005 because 3 miles, we just don't fly in 3 miles visibility. And when you do, you realize how bad that is.
Right.
So 1,005. But if on the days when it's 900 and visibility is 10 miles, because that's mostly around DFW, 6 to 10 miles on any given day is the norm, right? So you look out there and you could get away with flying at 900 feet. I mean, and some days I'll get a little bit of pushback. Well, it looks fine out here at Alliance, but I'm at Love Field and it's 900 feet. Guess what? I'm not leaving.
Right.
And on the days when I don't have necessarily people to pick up and I'm just by myself, and I have a good relationship with the tower, and they'll let me go special VFR, even though it's no special VFR there, but they'll let me out, and I know I can get away with that. And it's tempting on some days to eat. But then on those days, if I go special V out of Love Field and it's 900 feet, what you don't know is what it is between Love Field and Alliance. And you'll run into 600, 500. Visibility might go down to 2 miles, 3. So the limits are there for a reason. And so that's one thing that I've gotten really strict about, because all I'm doing is flying people. I'm moving them from point A to point B. I'm giving them a tour of Alliance. It's not worth it.
Right.
I think, now we have the Kobe Bryant situation that we can all kind of remember and think about, but I don't want to be another Kobe Bryant.
How we
flight.
perceive something, our viewpoint, our vantage point is so important. It doesn't matter if you're flying someone who has a net worth of $1 or a net worth of $1 billion. A life is still a life. I think we all would agree with that. Sometimes, however, people are flying somebody who is a VVVVIP. I don't know how many V's we can put in front of VIP. I mean, if you're a very important person, let's just leave it at that. But that's not our new society. So if you're flying a high net worth individual, it's easy to become enamored and believe that you must succeed. If they need to go from A to B, you must get that done. I look at it differently. I look at it as, if they're that damn important, then instead of pushing the minimums, you should probably expand them.
Right. I agree. Like, what is the mission? I was just thinking about that. Like, what was my mission on the night of that aerial refueling must plug long range raid practice? Like, my mission actually was not to complete that long range raid. It was to bring myself and my crew back safely and bring the ship back in good working condition. So, but the lives of the people first. So like you said, my mission when I'm carrying that person, that real important person, is to keep that person safe. And what also me, like we were talking about, my life is just as valuable as the very important person's life.
Absolutely.
At least to my family, it is. Maybe not to that person, but to my family. So our mission really is to bring ourselves back safe and the ship safe. If I can.
The ship is secondary.
Yes.
Lives are the most important. And you are the expert on board that aircraft. And, back flying for the military, arguably, every crew member was an expert.
Yes.
And they understood the risk. But in the civil world, many people that are your passengers.
That's a good point.
They don't know the risk.
They don't.
And if you assume a risk greater than they understand, I don't think you have that right. I don't think it's okay to say, you know what, this is pretty damn risky, but I'm good enough. I can make this work. Your passengers, they'd like to probably have a say in that.
Right.
And as professional aviators, oftentimes, it has been in the past, I'll say it this way, it has been in the past, true that people would hide their angst or their concern from the passengers because they didn't want to concern the passengers.
Right.
I would say if you're concerned enough, you're having to obfuscate your feelings about the safety of the flight, you need to stop. You can't continue. Unfortunately, many people do. It's a hard thing. It is. It's so difficult. But that's what we get paid to do.
Right.
We are not paid to wiggle the sticks. I mean, most of us, I think if you took whatever the minimum standard pilot is in this country, if you would present to us the minimum standard pilot, the pilot who is just barely capable of flying, but has a certificate.
Right.
And then you give us the best pilot in this country who is just Chuck
Yeager, right?
Chuck Yeager, yeah. He or she is just stupendously competent. Their ability to wiggle the sticks is probably not 10% different.
Right.
But I pose that their intellect, their ability to make good decisions, their ability to have foresight, good situational awareness, that's where you see the difference. Again, there are many Marine aviators that started out their career as lieutenants who didn't end their careers as colonels.
Right.
And I think the difference is intelligence, situational awareness, being unafraid. If I were to give advice to someone as a young aviator, I would say, do not be unafraid to speak the truth. What you believe is the truth.
Right.
It's so easy to follow down a path that you know is wrong, but you're fearful of saying no.
Right.
I believe you're absolutely here today, a healthy person, because of your willingness to do that. So you flew missions for many years, and then ultimately, did you retire from HMX? I can't recall, Gary.
After I left HMX, I retired as a light colonel, lieutenant colonel. But I had a choice to do several different things, and I ended up at the Pentagon for 2.5 years. So I retired in a non-flying billet at the Pentagon.
Okay.
And that's where I really, to be honest with you, that's when I made the decision. I kind of already knew that I wanted to keep flying when I got out. But when I was at the Pentagon, it just solidified, the torture was, because I was a big runner then as well. And so I would run every day. To keep my sanity, I would go run during lunch and I would be running around the mall and the Pentagon and all the monuments. And I'm seeing my HMX buddies flying overhead doing the presidential mission. And so it just killed me. And so I knew that I didn't want to sit behind a desk when I got out of the military. I wanted to fly. So those last 2.5 years is I said, okay, at the 20-year mark, I need to wrap this up, because every year that I stayed in was just a detriment to my, my life, my shelf life as a pilot for a civilian company. So I really felt like I needed to get out as soon as I could, but I wanted the retirement. So
sure.
But it also afforded me a great opportunity, because during those 2.5 years at the Pentagon, I was able to travel and take some time and really think about retirement and where it would be and with who. And so, and that's how, through that path, I ended up meeting the former chief pilot here, and
Bill Force, who hired me.
Yeah, right. And that's how I got my resume maybe moved to the top of the stack, because I think you said you may not have even looked at my resume if it wasn't for me knowing Bill Force.
Well,
networking.
It is about networking. What happened was, so Bill hired me here. He was the chief pilot, director of ops here, and then when he moved on, I took over that position. So Bill, I consider Bill to be a good friend of mine, a very active guy as well, runner, cyclist. And so Bill called me kind of out of the blue and said, hey, listen, I don't know if you need a pilot right now or not, or in the future, but let me put you in touch, or let me send you this information for this Marine aviator. And so Bill sent me your resume and said, I highly recommend this person. And quite honestly, when you have someone you respect tell you this is a person that I highly recommend, for me, it was kind of a no-brainer. We interviewed you, of course, extended an offer, and then waited 6 months for you to finally get out and come to work here. And absolutely a win for Airbus, no question.
It was a win for me and my family as well.
No question, yes.
And that 6-month thing was really, I'll be honest with you, that's what sold the deal for us, because that helped my family be able to relocate and get out here early. And so me having that security of knowing I had a job as soon as I retired, whereas I was also interviewing with some other companies and they weren't willing to do that for me. And so when you guys made an offer, and it was a very good offer, and it was going to be a great job, and it was in Texas, and pretty close to Aggie land, and so all that stuff. But that was a big deal when you guys made that offer at 6 months. That was huge for me and our family, and I think that's also something you as a leader, and then Airbus too. It was more of a coming into a family versus coming into a company, and you guys, when you're a family, that's the things you do for family, right? You make exceptions. You give them that opportunity. And so that was important to us.
Yeah. I've certainly tried to live my life that way. And when sometimes people ask what am I most proud of, or what's, my greatest accomplishment, or, what's the most fantastic thing I've done in aviation. And honestly, my response is always working with the best people I've ever had the privilege to know. And not just you, but, I'm not going to list all the people on this show right now, but I will say I've had the privilege and honor to work with the best of the best. And I don't mean simply as aviators. To be excellent, it's far, far, far more than being a good aviator or a great aviator. It's being a good person, a great person.
Yeah, I agree.
And when I would interview people, the first question I ask myself is this a person I would invite to my home to have dinner?
Mm-hmm.
And if the answer is yes, that's a good sign.
Right.
If the answer is no,
not a good sign.
It's not a good sign. So anyway, I think that, working together is kind of like a marriage. In fact, when you do work with someone, you're together as much as you are with your spouse.
Yes.
Yeah, we have a lot of great memories. We would talk a lot when we ran.
Yeah, we would.
I remember one time you were talking, we were running, and maybe you can talk about this, maybe you can't, but I remember you talking about flying the president down to, is it P-49? Was that the prohibited area? P-49 rings a bell. Maybe it's P-40.
P-40 sounds familiar.
P-40, anyway.
Yeah. Down
the
in
ranch.
Crawford.
Yeah. And you were talking about running or biking or doing something.
We can talk about that. Yeah, we can talk about that. Yeah, so the president was a big runner.
Still is, I believe. I think
he's a biker now.
Okay.
So he was a big runner. He actually, I want to say maybe in 2005 or 2006, he started having some issues running, just some injuries, and so he started to bike, and he took up biking, and then he became like the greatest mountain biker ever, and was leaving the Secret Service guys in the dirt. So he was an avid runner. He would run about a 7-minute mile. So
that's scooting.
Yes. And so one of the things that he would do out at the ranch is he had this thing called the 100-degree club. So he would invite the Marines to run with him. It had to be over 100 degrees. And he would invite the Marines to come out and run, and the Marines would run with him. And if you completed the 3 mile with him and he didn't leave you behind, then you would get the shirt that I beat the heat in Crawford 100-degree club. So that was a really, really cool. And I will tell you that there was one run in particular where several Marines fell out. Marine officers couldn't keep up with the president because, we did the 3 mile run, but 21-minute 3 mile run is fast.
That's fast.
And so there are some Marine officers that don't necessarily stay in shape. And
right.
This one time in particular, some people fell out. And then from then on, you actually had to run a PFT 3 mile run and show that you could do it in under 21 minutes before you were allowed to go and be there.
Right.
And the military aide to the president would have the list of the people that qualified to be able to do it. So nobody was falling out ever again after that.
Sure.
One embarrassing moment.
I'm sure. Yeah. Well, it is a little embarrassing for the president of the United States to outrun you.
Yes. But that's the kind of, I will tell you that's the kind of guy he was. Like I just heard a story the other day. I ran into a Secret Service guy on a recent flight op thing that we were doing, and we both ended up finding out that we were there at the same time, and we were telling some stories, and he told a story about the first day that the president switched from running to biking. And so the Secret Service guys weren't really ready for that.
They didn't have bikes.
A bunch of those dudes were like, oh, I got my bike. And he was talking about one guy in particular. He's like, this guy was all tough and everything. He's like, oh, I've got my bike. I'm ready to go. Well, it wasn't even 10 minutes. Like literally the president's on his bike and the president comes flying by and there's no one to be seen. And that guy that was talking tough was like, he was 5-10 minutes behind him. He couldn't keep up. And the president's laughing the whole way. That's just the way he was. He wanted to show you that he could outbike you.
Right. I love that attitude.
It is.
He was
gung ho, 100% into anything that he did. He gave it all that he had, and he was very competitive. So he was a fun guy to be around. Great family. Those 4 years, probably. I definitely. I don't want to say probably. It was the best 4 years of my career in the Marine Corps. I thoroughly enjoyed those 4, and my family did too. We got to do a lot of cool things, things that we'll never forget as a family.
Sure. Yeah, I've seen some photographs. They're fantastic. Yeah. So, yeah, it makes. He's a human. He's a person just like we are.
Right.
And I think that humanity and that humility, being humble, I've not met him. I've seen him many times at the ballpark. He's an avid,
right.
Well, he owned part of the Rangers.
Right, he did for a while, yes, he did. Yeah. And he still comes to the Rangers games.
Yeah, so he would sit about 10 rows in front of us and about 2 sections to the right.
Right, the Airbus, the old Airbus tickets in the old stadium,
Yeah, so we would see him down there with his wife, and now her name escapes me, which is embarrassing. But anyway, him and a few Secret Service people down there still.
Right.
So, and always just happy, enjoying the game. Yeah, that's awesome. So I want to shift gears just a little bit and talk about Kaylee.
Certainly.
And, it kind of chokes me up. It does.
Yeah.
So Kaylee lost her life to suicide. And you know what? I should have looked up the exact day. I remember it well because
5 April 2019.
Yeah, I was.
I remember it.
Yeah, I know.
Unfortunately,
and that's what I would have said the 5th of April in 19, because I was in Florida. I was speaking at Sun and Fun, and I was having lunch with my wife and my mother and father when you called me.
You were on my list of people that I had to call, and I will tell you, those were horrible calls.
Right,
they were not calls that I had fun doing at all, but you were on my list for obvious reasons.
So Gary called, and it was a day, I've not been that close to anyone who died by suicide, and not just Kaylee, although didn't know Kaylee nearly as well as I know you and Nancy, but I did know her, and we had water skied together, and been to her wedding.
And you knew how much we loved her and how important she was to us. Even though you hadn't met her and talked to her all that much, you knew who she was to us.
Right. And so that's a day that changed everyone's life that knows you, but perhaps you. I don't want to discount but it changed the trajectory of your life.
It did, most certainly.
And so tell us how it's impacted you and what you now hold dear and important beyond family. I'm talking about your aspirations.
Sure. It definitely did. I mean, I'll tell the people that are listening, this was not something that I thought that we would talk about, but I'm actually very appreciative that you're willing to talk about it, because I think this is more important than probably anything that we've talked about so far. And what we've talked about is very important when it comes to safety and decision-making and doing the right thing and having the courage to stand up and say what you need to say when you need to say it. And because it's life or death. But then this situation is just, I think it affects everyone, whether you're in aviation or not. No matter where you are, it cuts across all. Suicide, mental health, mental illness cuts across all populations and all socioeconomic
demographics,
backgrounds. And it's every no matter what the color of your skin is, or whether you're male or female or otherwise, it affects everybody.
Wealth,
yes,
intelligence, education.
Yes,
I mean,
and I will say, in aviation, aviation's a stressful business, and so mental illness and mental health and overall wellness. We talk a lot about sleep, circadian rhythms, and what we put in our body, and diet, exercise, and not self-medicating, but how often do you hear someone talk about mental health, mental illness, and the impact that has on us as aviators, as a community? But back to your question, so for me, I was on a path just to continue being a helicopter pilot and maybe working to become a board member on an aviation organization or something, and just kind of continue to hone my skills and make money and take care of my family. And then when Kaylee died and we got that phone call, it really did change everything, because now just the common questions of why and, what did we miss and where did we go wrong? And, how did this happen to our family? Just all those things are hitting you all at once. And then after the dust settles and the funeral's over and, you've buried your kid, and Kaylee was our second daughter. She was 24 years old when she died. And she had a very private, we believe, a long-term struggle with depression, but it wasn't something that was diagnosed and it wasn't something that we really understood as a family. And so when she died, we had to wrestle with all of that. And then once we came to grips with it all and the dust had settled, still not knowing why, I just really needed to do something. And again, it comes back to the God thing and just feeling a call to do something different. There's nothing wrong with being a helicopter pilot and with making money and supporting your family and having fun doing it. I mean, I've been so blessed, but I really felt like that God was like calling me to a new purpose. I just started doing different things after a year, volunteering with some local organizations.
And you spoke here at Airbus about it.
I did, yeah. I put together a presentation. I felt really that was the first call that I got was just God was like, put together a presentation and you need to start talking to people. I really felt like talking to people is like very important. Just shining a light on the darkness, because suicide and mental illness there's a lot of stigma attached to it. And it's a very dark topic. I mean, the quickest way to clear a room, start talking about suicide or start talking about death in general and people will leave. Mm-hmm.
Which is a shame.
It is, because that's what we need to have these conversations, like what we're doing right now. Like I think it's just so amazing that you're not scared to have this conversation on your podcast.
Well, like you, I know this is the most important. I really do. I believe that. When we talk about the courage it takes to sit in an aircraft and say, I can't do this. We're going back. We're bingo fuel. We're going back. This is bad weather. We're landing. The courage it takes to do that is enormous. The courage to step forward and say you have a mental illness, the courage to say you have suicidal thoughts, too few people have it. And they don't have that courage because we as a society, unfortunately, I believe, have squelched that. It's uncomfortable.
Right.
So we don't encourage people to be themselves and really to seek help.
Right.
So it's fascinating to me. That's where you have gone with your life.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's very important for all of us to understand, whether you're a father, mother, brother, friend, a boss, a leader, and someone in any leadership position at all, for us to make the people that we have the privilege of interacting with, to make them feel comfortable, to let them know that we're someone that they can come and talk to just extend that out to someone, even a stranger. I mean, we pass by so many people every day and we just don't even give them a second thought. And it kind of hit me, that reality hit me about a week or so after my daughter died, and I'm going to the grocery store to buy just some bread and milk and eggs, and I'm at the store and I've gone through the worst thing I've ever gone through in my life. And I'm walking in that store and people don't know that. Right. And that's what hit me is like, how many times have I walked through the store and I had someone like me that just needed someone to smile at them or say hi, or just ask them how they're doing and really mean it. Like, tell me how your day's been today. Not just the whole thing. How's it going? Good. Great. Right. Have a good day. And I just really came to grips with, people are hurting and they need someone to talk to, just someone to acknowledge them, someone to smile at them. And so that really became very important to me. That change, that's something that changed with me almost immediately. And then just having a desire to not just talk about it, but actually sit with people that are in pain and help them. And so that's the next thing that kind of came my way was just, I really felt like I was being called to go back to school. And I had the GI Bill that I hadn't used, which is a great benefit for those that are, considering the military. 4 years of advanced education. So I have a 4-year master, I could go up to 4 years. I'm doing a 2-year master's program right now, 2.5 years. I'm finishing that up. And the goal is to become a mental health counselor. So I'm at the end of that journey, getting through my schooling and doing my internship. And so I am literally sitting across from people and I believe doing what my daughter would have wanted me to do, because I believe that if she could have, she would have wanted to continue to live. And for whatever reason, all the variables that came together got her to a point where she decided she couldn't live anymore. And so I really believe that she would want me to sit across from people and help them find purpose and hope and want to continue to live. So, and as long as I can live, I feel like that's something I have to do. Like I need to fulfill that purpose. So I believe it's a call from her example, from her life. And I don't focus on the darkness of what happened to her. I focus on who she was. And she lived 24 years and she wasn't a perfect person, but she was a beautiful person. And I wish she was still here, but there are many people like her in different walks of life from all across, and they just need someone that they
can impact their future.
Yes, someone that will help them.
Unfortunately, you can't change Kaylee's,
No,
but you
we
can
can't.
change
Yeah.
others. This started, I believe, there's a text line. Is that 411-411?
Yeah, the 741-741.
741-741.
So
Forgive me. Yes.
The crisis text line. That was kind of the first thing that I was able to. I felt like I needed to do something, and so that was the quickest path to do a month worth of training and then immediately start getting on and helping people that are in crisis. And so I just found, I really, to be honest with you, to heal, I needed to do something like that. And not everyone, that's not the way that everybody else grieves. Grieving and mourning are a very individual process. But for me, that was part of my grieving process. I needed to do something. I needed to take action. And so that crisis text line, I did that for about a year and a half. Before
and
I started
that
to
was
go to
late
school.
night. I mean, I think that.
Yeah, I picked the late night times because no one can really say why, but I think it makes sense to, when you're in the darkness is there and it overwhelms you. And so at nighttime from like about 10 to 1 is when I would be on. That's when the most people are in crisis. I mean, so many people that there's people standing by waiting for 30 minutes to 45 minutes to talk to a counselor.
Right. I do believe, and again, I have no evidence of this, but in my own mind, if you're struggling with suicidal thoughts, if you can just hold on till the sun comes up.
Yeah. No,
darkness brings dread.
Right.
Often when we're in the darkness, there's solitude.
Right.
So you're alone. You're alone with your thoughts, and your thoughts aren't positive. They're negative. I'm sure there's a statistic somewhere, but I believe most people succumb probably between midnight and 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. I mean, I think it's a very...
Yeah. And that's when my daughter died. The best that we could put it together, it was sometime she made like an entry online on some site. She was a zookeeper and she was on some zookeeping site and made kind of her final comments, but nothing to do with suicide. I mean, she wasn't telling anybody what her plan was. And then so sometime after midnight is when she died. So and I think a person can be a light, like just that, because like you said, we isolate shame and that the shame, I like to call it the shame monster. When we're ashamed of ourselves, we focus inward and we isolate because we don't want to be around people because we're ashamed. And so that guilt and shame we focus inward, we're isolated and we're in the dark, and and sometimes you just
implode.
Need someone to rescue. And I think that's the importance of the crisis. I think it is, if I make a quick plug, just the crisis text line is 741-741. Anybody can use that. It's not just for people thinking about suicide. It's anybody in crisis. And then also now we have the 988. So you don't have to remember the 1-800 number anymore. That's the same thing. We call it the suicide crisis line, the suicide hotline, but it's not just for people that are considering suicide. It's for people that are in crisis and need someone to be a light in their life. I think that's a good way to think about it. You're in the darkness, you're being overwhelmed. You can dial 988. If you're military, you hit 1. It gives you the option to talk to a military counselor. If you're not military, there's people standing by to talk to you. But that crisis text line is a great option for people that don't necessarily want to talk on the phone to someone.
Right.
And so that 741-741, you can text anything. You can say hello. You can say, I need help. And somebody will, and it's 24/7. Both of those hotlines are 24/7.
We've had this conversation a few years ago. Kaylee was a person, when she made her decision, she was going to succeed.
Yeah. Part of her personality. When she does something, she does it.
I think stereotypically we think about people who fall victim to suicide as people who, there's an attempt or two before that fails, and maybe that happens. I know that happens. And those are certainly cries for help, or at least that's what I understand them to be. But people like Kaylee, and, she's no different than a lot of people that we know in this business, aviation, is a strong-willed person who was
Right.
success-driven.
Right.
I believe she felt like she didn't want to burden other people. She had made a decision, and she was going to execute that decision. And she did.
Right.
And I think when we look at our friends and family, statistically, there are many of our own friends and family that are suffering with issues like this. And yeah, we have to be open and try to be the light. And I have such respect for you. I mean, I think anyone on this listening that knows what it takes to be a licensed counselor would be appreciative of all that you've gone through to reach that point. And I am positive Kaylee is very proud of you. Again, I'm happy that you're willing to speak about it. It's a very personal thing.
Yeah, it is. And I think, the issue of completing suicide and, attempting suicide, unfortunately, we lose, the numbers change every year, but we lose about 48,000 people a year. And out of those, there's around 1.1 million attempts. So when you think about how many people actually attempt, and we use the term, complete, if they complete and they die, they become part of that, 48,000. If they attempt and they don't complete, well, then they survive. And so we call them survivors. And so that 1.1 million, just think about the number of people, and that number has gone up to about 1.4 million. But that's the population that can be helped. The people like Kaylee that complete, I mean, we can't talk to them or do anything, but the 1.1 or 1.4 million that survive, we can talk to them, we can gather information, we can do research, we can continue to try to fight this problem and figure out the best way to do it. I do think a big part of it is just talking.
Mm-hmm.
Talking isn't the only thing. We have to have targeted treatments.
Right.
We have to have specific things that we do. And we can get into a long discussion here, but basically we have to have these conversations.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you
And I think too,
having it.
when we think about at least my life and the goodness that running brought to my life.
Right.
I go back to how we started this conversation. We'd go run. And during the run, several things were happening. Number one, we were moving.
Mm-hmm.
And, the human body needs
Right.
exercise. And there's something called brain-derived neurotropic factor, BDNF. And, it's exercise
Yes.
promotes the development of BDNF, which promotes the development of neurogenesis. And I mean, all the good that's stunning. I think cardiovascular, we think about running or cycling. I cycle now too. I'm a little bit like
Right, like George Bush. That's
George
right.
Bush
You moved into the cycling arena, which is great.
I had to go cycling, but I think that we look at cardiovascular as the primary benefit of running, but I don't think that it is.
No,
I think
neurological
and mental health.
Yeah.
It's tough to have bad thoughts when you're exercising, talking with your buddies.
You're right.
There's just something powerful about that. I don't think anyone has succumbed to suicide with the sun shining, on a pastoral meadow with the birds singing. That just doesn't happen. It happens in the darkness of night while you're alone, while you're stagnant. I would say, and again, I have no qualification to say this, but I think if you find yourself in that position, pick up your cell phone, go for a walk, and call the hotline.
Yeah.
Get moving. Do not stay in that dark place.
Yes.
Get out of that dark place.
Please don't.
And just go, move, find humans, interact.
Yes.
If you remain in that dark spot, one day you may succumb. So I think that running for me and exercise has always been a positive thing, but more than cardiovascularly, but really from camaraderie. And
right.
You will remember, so we haven't talked about this, but so you'll remember our last run when you were talking about, you had resigned and you were moving on to, and I said, we did a lot together.
We did.
I remember talking about that, and we're like, well, we're going to stay in good contact.
Right,
and I said, Gary, that's wonderful, and you will always be my friend.
I do remember this conversation.
But yeah, there's no way we can have the same level of contact we have now because we won't And your life will go on and be different as well. And you will find other people and fascinating, life is always changing. It's ever changing. What I love about life, and Gary's heard me say this 1,000 times, is that once you've met someone or once you have a relationship with someone, they are always part of your life. You can't remove them. You
Right.
can't remove them if you want to remove them.
Right.
So that's one of the beauties of life, is that once you have a relationship, you're always going to have that relationship. And Gary and Nancy are certainly two people I know if I ever called and needed help, it wouldn't be the question wouldn't be when do you need it or how come or
Right,
why.
right.
It would be where are you? I will be there. And I think all people in the world need that. We all need relationships with people at that depth. And if you do, I think it can help any one of us avoid that deep, dark place. But you have to be willing to reach out for that help.
Yes.
So Gary, give us the information again, the how to get a hold.
So yeah, the crisis text line is 741-741, and you would type that into the, just like you type Gary Maddux or a phone number. So 741-741, and then just text whatever you need to text, and someone will text you back, and you'll start a conversation. And that's 24/7. And then now with the introduction of the 988, you instead of dialing 911, you dial 988, and that will take you to the suicide hotline. But remember, think of it more as a crisis hotline.
Sure.
Obviously, if you are considering suicide, I would highly recommend that you text or dial and talk to someone. And it can be anyone. You don't even have to. It doesn't have to be a hotline. It can be a friend.
Mm-hmm.
But just be honest and have that have that hard conversation, and let them know what you're struggling with, because then they can encourage you or help you find help.
Right.
They might not be the one that's going to help you or fix you, but they can help you get to a place where you're not, like you said, you're not alone. You're not in the darkness anymore. A light has already opened up in your life because you're talking to another person.
Right. And I would say, as a person, not a professional and have no experience in this, but if a friend of yours calls or someone calls and has this conversation, don't ask what you can do. Go to them immediately.
Yeah, right.
Go to them.
Yeah.
Don't ask if you can go to them. Don't say, what can I do for you? Because that puts the onus on them. Say, hey, listen, are you at home? I'll be over. Give me about 20 minutes.
Right.
Make a decision to help them. Don't put the decision upon them, and then go to them. Again, humans are meant to be together. If you're a prisoner, what do we do to prisoners if we want to punish them? We put them in solitary confinement. Don't leave your friend in solitary confinement.
Yeah. And then obviously I think it should go without saying, but probably important to mention it. You remember that you do have 911 as well. So if you believe someone's going to hurt themselves or hurt someone else, if there's any question in your mind, dial 911. I mean, and get that person help.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But the hotlines are a good
absolutely
initial measure. And then they will do the same thing. They will evaluate the person. They are professionals. They've got training, and they know how to deal with crisis. And their main goal in life is to get you out of crisis, whatever that means. Resources, 911, follow up, whatever the case may be. They're going to help you get out of crisis. So,
well, I hope for the listeners you've stayed with us to the end, because I do think the second part of this program has been as important as the first, and less talked about. I spend a lot of time promoting aviation safety and promoting good decisions, and but understanding the depths and breadth of this subject is enormously important. And
I agree.
I thank you for being here.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. So,
it's a treat.
It's been a good time. So we have reached our clearance limit. Until next time, resume on navigation.
If you or someone you know is currently in crisis, please text HOME to 741-741 or dial 988 to connect with a live crisis counselor. If you are outside of the United States, please visit findahelpline.com to locate a free, confidential support line near you.
The information provided during this podcast, Push to Talk with Bruce Webb, is made available for general information and educational purposes only. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily represent those of Airbus Helicopters, Inc. or its affiliates.